The rifle sight found Edmund Finch across the barn. Blood dripped from Garrett's ribs where the knife had cut deep. "Your daddy begged for his life," Finch snarled, "before I put a bullet in his chest 7 years ago." Garrett's finger tightened on the trigger, but it was Anna who fired first. The woman from Boston with $12 to her name had just killed her second man to save the rancher who'd forgotten how to live. This is their story. The gunshot cracked through the Wyoming twilight like the hand of God himself, but it wasn't Anna Blake who fired it. Not yet. That would come later, when her hands had learned the weight of killing. Right now, in this frozen moment of October 1885, the only thing Anna knew about guns was the terror of hearing one. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start where all great love stories start, with death. Garrett Stone knelt beside 2 graves on a windswept hill, his calloused hands trembling as he placed wildflowers on cold earth. The headstones stood side by side, carved from Wyoming granite, simple and stark as the man who'd ordered them. Sarah Stone, 1854 to 1880. Beloved wife. Little James Stone, 1879 to 1880. Gone too soon. 5 years they'd been in this ground. 5 years since fever had taken his infant son, first, then his wife 3 days later, both of them burning with a heat no Wyoming winter could cool. Garrett was 33 years old. He looked 50. The sunset painted the sky in shades of blood and gold, the kind of beauty that used to make Sarah catch her breath and squeeze his hand. Now, it just made him tired. Bone tired, soul tired. The kind of tired that came from waking up every morning and choosing to keep breathing even when breathing felt like the hardest work a man could do. He stood slowly, knees protesting. His body was young, but he'd worked it old, driving himself from dawn to midnight every day for 5 years, trying to outrun grief through sheer exhaustion. It hadn't worked. The grief was always there, waiting in the quiet moments in the empty house, in the bed that still smelled faintly of her lavender soap, even though he'd washed the sheets 100 times. The Iron Heart Ranch spread out below him in the valley, 2,000 acres of prime grazing land his father had carved out of wilderness 30 years ago. The main house sat dark and silent. No smoke from the chimney, no lights in the windows. From here it looked abandoned. In a way it was. A house wasn't a home when nobody lived in it, only haunted it. Garrett turned his back on the graves and mounted his horse, a big roan stallion named Storm. The animal knew the way home without guidance, which was good because Garrett's mind was elsewhere. It was always elsewhere these days, caught in a loop of memories he couldn't escape and didn't really want to. Sarah laughing as she hung laundry in the summer wind. Little James taking his first wobbling steps across the parlor floor. The way the house used to smell on Sunday mornings when Sarah made her special cinnamon bread. The sound of her singing while she worked. The feel of her hand in his. All gone. All dust. Storm picked his way down the rocky slope as darkness gathered in the valley. Garrett barely noticed. He was too busy being somewhere else, someone else in a past that felt more real than the present. He didn't know that everything was about to change, that right now, at this exact moment, a woman was running for her life through sagebrush 5 miles away, and that her survival would become tangled with his in ways neither of them could predict. He didn't know that in 24 hours he'd be standing in his kitchen, arguing with a stranger who'd somehow managed to make him angry, which was the first real emotion he'd felt in 5 years, besides grief. He didn't know that the empty house waiting for him in the darkness would soon be full of life again, full of noise and warmth, and the smell of real cooking, and the sound of a woman humming while she worked. He didn't know any of this. All he knew was the weight of 5 years of loneliness and the certain knowledge that this was how the rest of his life would be. Alone, working, existing but not living, waiting for death without actually seeking it. The horse carried him home through gathering night, and Garrett let it passive as driftwood in a current. Tomorrow would be the same as today. Today had been the same as yesterday. This was his life now. This was all it would ever be. He was wrong, but he didn't know that yet. 12 hours earlier, the sun had risen over Iron Heart Ranch like a promise nobody'd asked for. Garrett woke at 4 in the morning because that's what his body did, now trained by years of ranch work to rise before dawn. He lay in the big bed alone, staring at the ceiling in the gray pre-dawn light, and went through his mental checklist for the day. Check the north fence line. 2 sections needed repair. Move the yearlings to the east pasture. The grass was better there this time of year. Review the books. He was 3 months behind on the ledgers, and it was starting to show in ways that would have made his father shake his head in disappointment. Send Danny into Sweetwater for supplies. They were low on everything from coffee to nails. It was a full day's work. It was always a full day's work. That's how Garrett liked it. He dressed in the dark same clothes he always wore. Denim pants worn soft with age and washing. A flannel shirt blue with 1 button missing. Boots that needed new soles, but he hadn't gotten around to it. A leather vest his father had given him 20 years ago, back when Garrett was 13 and thought he knew everything. The kitchen was exactly how he'd left it the night before. Dishes in the sink unwashed, coffee pot on the stove grounds from yesterday still in the bottom, a plate with the remains of beans and burned biscuit sitting on the table hard as adobe brick now. The whole room had the defeated air of a place where nobody cared anymore. Garrett made fresh coffee, threw out the old grounds, and left the dishes for later. Later never came, but he told himself it would. He ate standing up, chewing mechanically on jerky and stale bread, tasting nothing. Food was fuel now, not pleasure. He'd lost 20 pounds in the first year after Sarah died and never gained it back. He was drinking his second cup of coffee black and strong enough to strip paint when he heard boots on the porch. Heavy, familiar steps. Hank Cooper, his foreman and the closest thing to family, Garrett had left. The door opened without knocking. They were past that kind of formality. Hank was 58, grizzled and tough as boot leather, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. He'd worked for Garrett's father, first had been there the day Garrett was born, had taught the boy to ride and rope and shoot, had stood beside him at Sarah's grave, one of the few people Garrett had allowed to see him break. Now Hank stood in the doorway and looked around the kitchen with an expression Garrett recognized. Disappointment mixed with concern, wrapped in frustration. Boss Hank said, "We need to talk." Garrett kept his eyes on his coffee. "Make it quick. Got fence to check. That's the problem." Hank stepped into the kitchen, let the door close behind him. "You always got fence to check, or cattle to move, or something to fix. Always working, never living." The coffee was cooling in Garrett's cup. He drank it anyway, felt it go down bitter and cold. "I manage fine." Hank made a noise that might have been a laugh if it had contained any humor. "You call this managing?" He gestured at the disaster around them. "This ain't managing, boss. This is barely surviving. When's the last time you had a real meal? Not jerky and burnt biscuit. Real food. I eat. You fuel up. That ain't the same thing." Hank's voice softened slightly. "Garrett, it's been 5 years." Garrett's hands tightened on the coffee cup. "Don't. 5 years since Sarah and little James passed. 5 years you've been living like this, working yourself to death, avoiding everyone, letting this house fall apart around you. I said don't." The words came out flat, hard, final. But Hank had known Garrett since he was in diapers. He wasn't intimidated. "When's the last time you talked to Emily? Your sister's called 3 times this month. You didn't answer once. Emily was fine. She had a husband, 3 kids, a life of her own in Montana. She didn't need her older brother dragging her down with his grief." "The ranch runs smooth," Garrett said. "Books are balanced." The books weren't balanced. Men are paid on time. That was true, at least. What else matters? Living matters. You're 33 years old, not 63. This place is falling apart, and you don't even see it anymore. Or you see it and just don't care. The observation stung because it was true. Garrett did see it. The dust, the disorder, the slow decay. He saw it the way you see wallpaper present but not really registering. And Hank was right about the not caring part too. What did it matter if dishes piled up or floors went unswept? "Who was here to care? I'm handling it," Garrett said. "You ain't." Hank took a breath, and Garrett recognized the set of his foreman's jaw. It was the expression Hank got when he'd made a decision, and damn the consequences. "Which is why I took steps." Garrett's attention sharpened. What kind of steps? I hired someone. Woman from back east. Boston. She's coming today to be household manager. The coffee cup hit the table harder than Garrett intended. You did what someone's got to save you from yourself, boss, even if you're too stubborn to see it. The anger came quick and hot, the first strong emotion Garrett had felt in months besides the gray weight of grief. You had no right. This is my house, my ranch. You don't make those decisions. Someone's gotta. Hank's voice stayed level calm. Look around you, Garrett. Really look. You're drowning and you don't even know it. Garrett stood abruptly, chair scraping loud on the floor. Send her back. Soon as she arrives, you send her back. I don't want strangers in my house. She's already on the stagecoach. Be here by evening. Then you can explain to her that she's got no job. Because I'm not doing it. Garrett grabbed his hat off the peg by the door and stormed out before Hank could say anything else. Behind him he heard his foreman sigh, but he didn't turn back. Didn't want to see the concern on Hank's weathered face. Didn't want to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, the old man had a point. Storm was waiting in the corral, already saddled. Danny, the youngest ranch hand at 18, must have gotten him ready. The boy was a hard worker, eager to please. Reminded Garrett of himself at that age, full of energy and optimism and the certainty that hard work could solve any problem. Garrett had learned different. Some problems couldn't be worked away. Some losses couldn't be fixed with effort and determination. Sometimes life just took things from you, and there was nothing you could do but endure. He rode out toward the north pasture, putting distance between himself and Hank's words, but the words followed anyway. You're 33, not 63. Living matters. 5 years you've been like this. The fence line came into view, and Garrett dismounted, pulling tools from his saddlebag. The work was mindless physical, exactly what he needed. Posts to reset, wire to string, simple problems with simple solutions. Not like the complicated mess of his actual life. He'd been working for maybe an hour when he heard it. Distant, but distinct. A gunshot, then another coming from the direction of the Sweetwater Road. Out here you paid attention to gunshots. They usually meant trouble. Garrett stood listening. More shots, irregular, not target practice. This was active shooting. A fight or a chase. The smart thing would be to ignore it. Ride for the sheriff in Sweetwater, let the law handle whatever was happening. But Garrett found himself mounting Storm and turning toward the sound, some old instinct overriding common sense. His father's voice in his head from years ago. A man doesn't ride away from trouble, son. Not if someone might need help. He rode fast, following the sound, and came out on a ridge overlooking a stretch of open country between his land and the main road. What he saw made him rein up hard. A woman running through the sagebrush, dress torn and dusty, clutching a carpet bag like it was the most precious thing in the world. Behind her, 3 men on horses circling like wolves around prey. Garrett recognized the lead rider even from this distance. Edmund Finch, a scar running down his face from a knife fight years back. Local outlaw known for robbery and worse. The woman stumbled, went down. The riders closed in. Garrett didn't think. His rifle was out of its scabbard and raised to his shoulder in one smooth motion, and he fired before conscious thought caught up with action. The shot kicked up dirt 2 feet in front of Finch's horse, and the animal reared, almost throwing its rider. That's far enough. Garrett called out, his voice carrying across the distance. He worked the lever action, ejecting the spent cartridge, chambering a fresh round. All 3 riders turned to look at him. Well, well, Finch called back. Garrett Stone. Didn't know this was your party. It is now. Garrett kept the rifle steady, aimed center mass at Finch. Lady alone in my territory makes it my business. Your territory. Finch laughed, ugly sound. This is open country, Stone, and this woman's got property of ours. Garrett's eyes flicked to the woman. She'd scrambled to her feet but hadn't run, was watching this exchange with the trapped awareness of someone who knew her life hung in the balance. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair coming loose from pins and eyes that showed white all around with fear. But she wasn't begging, wasn't crying, just standing there gripping that carpet bag chin up despite the terror he could see in every line of her body. Something about that quiet dignity made Garrett's decision for him. Property from where he asked Finch. "Stagecoach got robbed this morning," one of Finch's companions said. "She ran before we could question her proper." Question her. Right. Garrett had heard about Finch's questioning methods. "By robbed, you mean you robbed it." "Now that's an accusation," Finch said, but his grin said Garrett was exactly right. "Might be we was just trying to help, recover stolen goods, and I might believe that if I was stupid." Garrett shifted his aim slightly, making sure Finch understood he had the advantage. "High ground, good rifle, steady hands. Here's what's going to happen. You three are going to ride away. Lady stays with me. You making this personal, Stone? I'm making this simple. You ride out, or I shoot you down. Your choice." The math wasn't hard. 3 men with pistols versus 1 man with a rifle at distance. The rifle had all the advantages. Finch was mean, but he wasn't stupid. His eyes narrowed, calculating odds, and apparently he didn't like what he came up with. "This ain't over," he said finally. "It is for today." Finch spat into the dirt, glanced at his companions, then back at Garrett. "See you around, Stone." And to the woman loud enough for Garrett to hear. "You too, darling, real soon." Then they were riding away, 3 dark shapes against the setting sun, and Garrett was alone on the ridge with a stranger who'd almost died in his territory. He lowered the rifle, slid it back into the saddle scabbard, and urged Storm down the slope toward her. She didn't move as he approached, just watched him with those wide eyes. Up close, she was younger than he'd thought. 25, maybe 26. Dusty and disheveled, but there was quality in the cut of her dress, or had been before it got torn and stained. Eastern quality. City clothes, not frontier. "You hurt?" he asked. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She tried again. "No, I don't think so." "Can you ride?" She nodded. Garrett dismounted and held Storm's reins. The woman approached cautiously, like she wasn't sure if she'd traded one danger for another. Smart woman. Out here you couldn't always tell the good men from the bad until it was too late. He helped her mount, careful not to touch more than necessary, then swung up behind her. She stiffened when his arms came around to hold the reins, but she didn't protest. Probably too tired and too scared. They rode in silence for a few minutes. Garrett could feel her trembling, the fine muscle tremors of someone running on adrenaline with nowhere left to go. He'd seen it before, that aftermath of terror. Give it another few minutes and she'd probably cry or laugh or both. "What's your name?" he asked, more to distract her than because he cared. "Anna." Her voice was hoarse, probably from screaming or running or both. "Anna Blake. I'm Garrett Stone. Own the Ironheart Ranch. You were on the stagecoach this morning?" "Yes." "We were almost to Sweetwater when they came. The driver, Mr. Peterson, he tried to resist. They shot him. Garrett had known Peterson, good man, family in town. Sorry to hear that. It happened so fast. One moment everything was fine and the next." Anna's voice broke. "I saw him fall. There was so much blood." Garrett didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. What comfort could you offer for witnessing violence? Some things you just had to carry, let time dull the sharp edges until you could think about them without flinching. "Why'd they chase you?" he asked instead. "I had my bag." Anna's arms tightened around the carpet bag in her lap. "When the others gave up their valuables, I couldn't. Everything I have is in here." Garrett understood that kind of desperation. Sometimes an object became more than just a thing. It became the last piece of who you used to be, and losing it meant losing yourself. They were approaching Ironheart, now the buildings visible in the valley below. Garrett heard Anna's small intake of breath and wondered what she saw. Probably not the prosperity his father had built, not anymore. Probably just a collection of weathered buildings that had seen better days, maintained enough to function, but not enough to impress. "That's Ironheart," he said. "It's beautiful." Garrett glanced at her, startled. Beautiful wasn't a word he'd have chosen. Functional, maybe. Adequate. But beautiful. The land, maybe. The sweep of the valley. The mountains rising in the distance. The big sky overhead. That was beautiful. But the ranch itself was just wood and nails and hard work. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "Before the robbery. Sweetwater. Someone was supposed to meet me." Anna paused. "I was hired as a household manager. At the Ironheart Ranch. Garrett's hands tightened on the reins, and Storm tossed his head in protest. He forced himself to ease up. The Ironheart Ranch. He repeated, voice flat. Yes. The letter said to take the stage to Sweetwater, and Mr. Cooper would meet me. But obviously. Anna's voice trailed off. Obviously today didn't go as planned. Obviously not. They rode the last quarter-mile in silence. Garrett's mind was working through the implications. This was Hank's hire, the woman from Boston, which meant she'd traveled 2,000 miles for a job that didn't actually exist, at least not officially, and now she'd been robbed, nearly killed and rescued by the very man who was supposed to send her away. The universe had a cruel sense of humor sometimes. Ranch hands were finishing their work as Garrett rode in. He saw their heads turn, saw the surprise on their faces. Boss didn't bring women home. Boss didn't bring anyone home. The fact that he had one on his horse right now was going to be the talk of the bunkhouse for days. Hank emerged from the barn, took one look at Anna, and his weathered face went through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, understanding. Then something that might have been satisfaction. Boss Hank said carefully, I see you found our new hire. Garrett dismounted, then helped Anna down. She swayed slightly, and he kept a hand on her elbow until she steadied. Found her running from the Finch gang. They hit the morning stage, killed Peterson. Hank's satisfaction vanished, replaced by anger. That the truth, ma'am, Anna nodded. 3 of them. The man with the scar, he shot Mr. Peterson when he tried to protect the strong box. Edmund Finch. Hank spat into the dirt. Should have hung that bastard years ago. Should have done a lot of things. Garrett looked at Anna properly for the first time. Dust in her hair, tear in her dress, bruise forming on her cheekbone. But standing straight, carpetbag still clutched in both hands, meeting his eyes without flinching. Miss Blake, he said formally, we need to talk. Inside, Hank said quickly, Lady's had a hard day. Let's at least get her inside, get her some water. Garrett wanted to argue, but Hank was right. Whatever conversation they needed to have could wait until the woman wasn't swaying on her feet from exhaustion and shock. The main house looked even worse in the evening light. Garrett saw Anna's eyes widen as they entered, saw her taking in the disorder. Dust on every surface, dishes in the sink, floor that hadn't been swept in weeks, cobwebs in the corners. His mother would have wept to see her house in this state. Anna Blake said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. Hank bustled around, pulling out a chair for Anna, getting her water from the pump, finding some jerky and hard biscuit that passed for food in this house. Anna drank the water gratefully, but only nibbled at the food. Probably wise. The biscuit could break teeth. Garrett stood by the window, arms crossed, watching. Now that the immediate danger was past, he could feel the familiar numbness settling back over him, the brief flare of action fading back to gray. This was his life now, interrupted occasionally by crisis, but always returning to the same empty baseline. Hank cleared his throat. Miss Blake, I'm Hank Cooper. I'm the one who hired you. Anna set down her water cup carefully. Mr. Cooper? The letter you sent said I'd be met at the stagecoach stop in Sweetwater. I know, ma'am. I was headed there when I heard about the robbery. Came back to check if anyone needed help. Didn't expect you'd already be here. She's here because those outlaws chased her onto my land, Garrett said. And I'd like to know why my foreman is hiring household staff without my permission. Anna's head turned sharply toward him. Without your permission. Garrett kept his eyes on Hank. Want to explain? Hank had the grace to look embarrassed. Boss, I was trying to help. By lying to a woman and bringing her 2,000 miles for a job that doesn't exist. Anna stood abruptly. The chair scraped loud on the floor. I'm sorry. There's been a mistake. This was all a mistake. I should go. Garrett's hand shot out, caught her arm before she could bolt. Where? It's dark. Finch and his boys are still out there. And you've got exactly nowhere to go. The words came out harsher than he'd intended. Anna flinched but didn't pull away, just stood there looking at him with those dark eyes that showed too much pain of their own. This woman wasn't just scared and tired. She was at the end of her rope, and they all knew it. Garrett let go of her arm. Sit down, please. Anna sat slowly. Garrett turned to Hank. "Explain. All of it." Hank took a breath. "I wrote to the Holbrook Employment Agency in Boston, told them we needed a household manager, someone to run the house, keep books, organize supplies. Got several replies, but Miss Blake stood out." Why, Garrett asked, though he was looking at Anna when he said it. "She's educated, good with numbers, has experience managing a household." Hank's voice was defensive now, "and she needed the work bad enough to come all this way. Figured that showed determination." "It shows desperation," Garrett said flatly. Anna's chin came up. "I'm sitting right here, Mr. Stone. If you want to discuss my situation, you could address me directly instead of talking around me." "Fair point." Garrett pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Why'd you come to Wyoming?" "Miss Blake?" "What were you running from?" "I wasn't running from anything. I was running toward opportunity. With all due respect, that's horse manure. Nobody comes from Boston to Wyoming territory unless they've got no other choice." Color rose in Anna's cheeks, but her voice stayed level. "You're right. I had no other choice. My parents died within 6 months of each other. My father left debts. Everything was sold to pay them. I had no family, no prospects, and $12 to my name. So when Mr. Cooper's letter arrived offering employment, I took it. Not because I was running, but because it was my only chance to survive with my dignity intact." The quiet fury in her words surprised Garrett. This wasn't a woman broken by circumstance. This was a woman who'd been knocked down and gotten back up, who'd crossed a continent alone with nothing but determination and a carpetbag. "I'm sorry about your parents," he said, and meant it. "Thank you." Anna's hands were folded on the table, knuckles white with tension. "But that doesn't change the situation. Mr. Cooper hired me in good faith. I came in good faith. But if the job doesn't exist, then I'll leave in the morning and we'll all pretend this never happened." "Where will you go?" Garrett asked again. "I don't know. Sweetwater, I suppose. Perhaps the sheriff knows of families needing help." Garrett doubted it. Sweetwater was a small town, maybe 300 people. Jobs were scarce, and a woman alone, no family, no references. She'd be lucky to find anything. "The house needs work," Hank said into the silence. "Books are 3 months behind. Supplies running low. The men are eating beans and burned biscuit every night because none of us can cook worth a damn." "We manage," Garrett said. "We survive. That ain't the same thing." Garrett looked around his kitchen, really looked the way Hank had asked him to that morning. Saw it not through his own numbed eyes, but through Anna's. Through the eyes of someone who'd once lived in a proper house back east where things were clean and ordered and cared for. It was a disaster, a monument to 5 years of a man slowly giving up. Miss Blake, Garrett said slowly, "What did Hank promise you? $30 a month, room and board, position as household manager. That's generous. It's fair for the work involved." Anna met his eyes. "Mr. Cooper's letter was very clear about the scope of duties. This is a large house and a working ranch. Managing it properly would be a full-time job, and you can do that. I managed my parents' household from age 16, kept their books organized, their staff planned their social calendar. When my mother fell ill, I nursed her for 6 months while keeping the house running. I'm more than capable of managing a ranch household, Mr. Stone. The question is whether you want me to." The question hung in the air between them. Garrett could feel Hank watching, waiting, could feel the weight of his own exhaustion, the mess around them, the empty years stretching behind and ahead. He should send her away, should give her money for a ticket, send her to his sister in Montana maybe. Emily would take her in, find her work. That was the smart choice, the safe choice. Bringing a stranger into his house, into his carefully maintained isolation, that was dangerous. That threatened the walls he'd built to keep the pain manageable. But he was so tired, tired of beans and burned biscuit, tired of dishes piling up, tired of books he couldn't make himself care enough to balance, tired of existing instead of living. "Stay," he heard himself say. Anna blinked. "I'm sorry." "Stay? Do the job Hank hired you for. $30 a month, room and board. Keep the house, manage supplies, handle the books. The ranch work is separate. That's on me and the men." Anna's face was unreadable. "And what about propriety, Mr. Stone?" An unmarried woman living in a bachelor's household. People will talk. Let them. Garrett stood. You worried about your reputation? I was engaged back in Boston. Anna's voice was flat. To a man from a good family. When my father died and left debts, my fiancée ended our engagement and married someone wealthier within a month. So, no, Mr. Stone. I'm not particularly worried about my reputation. That ship sailed some time ago. Then we have a deal. Anna stood as well. She was smaller than him by nearly a foot, but she didn't shrink back. One condition, name it. I work for my wages. I'm not charity, and I won't be treated as such. If you want me gone at any point, you tell me straight. No hints, no making things uncomfortable until I leave on my own. Honest dealing between us. Agreed. Garrett extended his hand. Anna shook it. Her grip was firm, her palm soft against his calloused one. The contact was brief, but Garrett felt it anyway, the warmth of another person's touch. It had been so long since anyone had touched him with anything other than pity or concern. Hank was grinning like a fool. I'll show Miss Blake to the guest room, used to be Emily's room before she married. After they left, Garrett stood alone in his kitchen and wondered what he'd just agreed to. A stranger in his house. Someone who'd see the full extent of his deterioration. Someone who'd probably judge him for it, and rightfully so. But maybe that's what he needed. Someone to see him clearly and call him on it. Someone to shake up the careful numbness he'd cultivated. Someone to remind him that the world kept turning even when you wanted it to stop. Outside, night had fallen complete. Garrett walked to the window and looked out at his ranch, his legacy, his prison. Somewhere out there, Finch and his gang were riding toward whatever hole they called home. Tomorrow, they'd wake up and plan their next robbery, their next bit of violence. That was their pattern, what they did. And tomorrow, Garrett would wake up and work himself to exhaustion, same as always. Except now there'd be a woman in his house. A woman with dark eyes and quiet dignity, and a steel spine that showed through even in her fear. He didn't know yet that she'd save his life. Didn't know he'd save hers in return. Didn't know that in 3 months they'd stand together against worse than Finch. Didn't know she'd shoot 2 men to protect him. Didn't know he'd kneel in a garden and propose marriage with his dead wife's ring. All he knew was that something had changed today. Some pivot point had been reached. The careful isolation he'd maintained was cracked now, and there was no uncracking it. Garrett Stone stood in his dark kitchen and felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Fear, not of outlaws or danger, but of hope, that most dangerous of emotions, the one that hurt worst when it got crushed. He took a breath and let it out slow. Whatever came next, he'd face it, same as he'd faced everything else, one day at a time, 1 foot in front of the other, surviving, maybe someday living, but not yet. Not quite yet. Upstairs, Anna Blake sat on the edge of a dusty bed in a room that had once been loved and was now forgotten, and cried silent tears of relief and exhaustion and fear. She'd survived. Barely, but she'd survived. Tomorrow she'd start earning her keep. Tomorrow she'd prove she was worth the risk Hank had taken in hiring her. Tomorrow she'd show Garrett Stone that she wasn't just some helpless Eastern woman who'd collapse at the first sign of hardship. But tonight she let herself be small and scared and lost. Let herself mourn everything she'd left behind. Let herself wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. Then she dried her eyes, washed her face in the basin Hank had left, and started unpacking her carpet bag. Inside was everything she owned in the world. 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, her father's pocket watch, a bundle of letters tied with ribbon, $12 in small bills. Not much to show for 26 years of living. But it was hers. Her past, her present, her possibility of a future. Anna Blake looked around the room, saw the dust and neglect, and made a decision. Tomorrow she'd clean this room until it shone. Then she'd move on to the rest of the house. She'd impose order on chaos, create beauty from disorder, and prove that she deserved to be here. She'd survive. More than that, she'd thrive. She didn't know yet that the man downstairs would become her whole world. Didn't know she'd teach him to laugh again, to hope again, to love again. Didn't know he'd do the same for her. All she knew was that she'd been given a second chance, and she intended to take it with both hands and hold on tight. 2 people, 2 broken hearts, 1 house full of ghosts. 3 months from now, that house would be full of life instead. Full of love and warmth and the sound of Anna humming while she worked. Full of Garrett's quiet laughter and the smell of real cooking and the feeling of home. But they had to get there first, had to survive what was coming, had to face down violence and gossip and their own fears, had to choose each other over and over until the choosing became as natural as breathing. The story of Garrett Stone and Anna Blake was just beginning, and like all great love stories, it would be written in equal parts hope and heartbreak, danger and devotion. But they didn't know that yet. Right now, they were just 2 strangers under the same roof, both wondering if they'd made the right choice. Time would tell. Time always did. The Wyoming stars wheeled overhead, infinite and indifferent. The wind whispered through the valley. And in the big house at Ironheart Ranch, 2 people tried to sleep and mostly failed, their minds too full of questions and possibilities. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, they'd survived. And sometimes survival was enough. Sometimes it had to be. Morning came to Ironheart Ranch the way it always did in Wyoming, sudden and unforgiving. The sun crept over the eastern hills like a thief, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, touching the weathered buildings with light that made them look almost beautiful. Almost. Garrett woke at 4, same as every morning, his body trained by years of habit to rise before dawn. But this morning was different. This morning there was someone else in his house, a stranger sleeping in his sister's old room, a woman who'd seen the full extent of his failure, the mess he'd been living in, and somehow agreed to stay anyway. He lay in bed for a moment longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house. It was silent as always, but felt different somehow, less empty. The knowledge that another person breathed the same air, occupied the same space, it changed something fundamental, made the silence less absolute. Garrett rose and dressed in the dark, moving quietly so as not to wake Anna. She'd had a hard day yesterday. She deserved to sleep. He made his way downstairs and stopped in the kitchen doorway, frozen by what he saw. Anna Blake stood at the stove, fully dressed despite the early hour, making coffee. She'd found an apron somewhere, probably in one of the drawers his mother used to use, and tied it over her dress. Her dark hair was pinned up neatly, and she moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, as if she'd been doing this for years instead of hours. The kitchen looked different. Not clean, not yet, but organized. The dishes from last night were washed and stacked. The table was cleared, the floor showed signs of sweeping, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air, real coffee made properly, instead of the thick, bitter sludge Garrett usually produced. Anna turned and saw him standing there. She didn't startle, just met his eyes calmly. "Good morning, Mr. Stone. I hope you don't mind. I couldn't sleep and I thought I might as well make myself useful." Garrett found his voice. "You're up early." "I'm always up early. Old habit from caring for my mother. She often needed help in the night, so I learned to function on little sleep." Anna poured coffee into 2 cups, added nothing to hers, and handed one to Garrett. "I hope it's acceptable. I found the beans in the pantry." Garrett took the cup and sipped. It was perfect. Strong but not bitter hot, but not scalding. Nothing like the paint thinner he usually made. "It's good. Thank you." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, both uncertain of the protocol. Employer and employee, but also 2 people who were essentially strangers, forced into uncomfortable intimacy by circumstance. Hank arrived before the silence stretched too long, stomping onto the porch and through the door without knocking. He stopped when he saw them both standing there, registered the changed kitchen, and a smile split his weathered face. "Well now," he said, "this is more like it." "Morning, Miss Blake. Sleep all right?" "As well as could be expected." Anna set down her cup. "Mr. Cooper, perhaps you could show me around today? I'd like to understand the full scope of what needs doing." "Be happy to, ma'am." Hank grabbed a cup and poured himself coffee, took a long drink, and made a satisfied noise. "Now that's real coffee. Been drinking the boss's tar for so long I forgot what the good stuff tastes like." Garrett felt heat rise in his face but said nothing. It was true enough. He'd never learned to make decent coffee and hadn't cared enough to try. "I'll need to go through the pantry, make a proper inventory," Anna was saying. "And the books. Mr. Cooper mentioned they're behind." 3 months behind. Hank confirmed, shooting Garrett a meaningful look. "Boss has been too busy with ranch work to keep up with paperwork." "I see." Anna's tone was neutral, but Garrett heard the judgment underneath. "Well, that will be one of my priorities. I'll also need to understand the household budget, what we can afford for supplies." The word we struck Garrett oddly, as if she belonged here already, as if this was her house too. It wasn't, not really. She was an employee. But something about the way she said it, the quiet assumption of partnership, it settled something in his chest he hadn't known was unsettled. After breakfast, which consisted of the same jerky and hard biscuit as always, because Anna hadn't had time to cook yet, Hank took Anna on a tour of the ranch. Garrett watched them go, saw Hank pointing out buildings and explaining operations, saw Anna asking questions and taking notes in a small book she'd produced from somewhere. Then he mounted Storm and rode out to check fence line like he'd planned yesterday before everything changed. The work was the same as always. Physical, mindless, exactly what he needed. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman in his house, the way she'd looked in his kitchen, the smell of real coffee, the small changes she'd already made. It scared him how quickly he'd noticed those changes, how quickly he'd started to appreciate them. That was dangerous, getting used to someone being around, getting used to small comforts, because comfortable things could be taken away, and the losing hurt worse than never having them at all. He worked until noon, then rode back to the house for lunch. Found Anna in the kitchen again, this time with Danny and 2 other ranch hands sitting at the table eating something that actually smelled good. Stew, from the looks of it, made with beef and vegetables Anna must have found in the pantry. Boss Danny said, grinning, "Miss Blake made real food. You gotta try this." Garrett filled a bowl and sat. The stew was excellent, properly seasoned, the beef tender, and the vegetables cooked just right. It had been so long since he'd eaten real food that the taste was almost shocking. "This is good," he said to Anna, who was working at the counter. "Thank you. You're welcome." She didn't turn around. "I found some dried vegetables and canned tomatoes in the pantry. Quite a supply, actually. Your mother must have put them up." The mention of his mother created the familiar ache in Garrett's chest, but duller than usual. Blunted by good food and the comfortable sound of men eating and talking. She did. Every summer. Anna did turn, then wiping her hands on the apron. "I hope you don't mind that I used them. That's what they're there for." Garrett kept his voice even. "You might as well use everything that's still good. No point letting it go to waste." After lunch, Anna tackled the books. She set up in what had been his father's office, a small room off the main house that Garrett rarely used anymore. She worked with focused intensity, organizing papers, entering figures in ledgers, occasionally calling out to Hank with questions about expenses or inventory. Garrett tried to stay out of her way, but found himself drawn to the office doorway several times throughout the afternoon. Each time he looked in, Anna was bent over the ledgers, her face intent, a small line between her eyebrows that appeared when she was concentrating. By evening, she'd made significant progress. The papers that had been scattered across the desk were now in neat stacks. The ledgers that had been 3 months behind were caught up through the end of September, and Anna had a list of questions that suggested she'd found several problems Garrett hadn't even known existed. "Mr. Stone," she said when he appeared in the doorway for the 4th time. "Could we discuss the books?" Garrett entered reluctantly. He hated paperwork, always had. That was supposed to be his father's domain, then Sarah's when they married. After Sarah died, he'd tried to keep up, but eventually just gave up. As long as there was money in the bank to pay the men and buy supplies, that was enough. Anna gestured to the ledger. "You're being overcharged by your supplier in Cheyenne. The prices they're billing you don't match the market rates. I checked against the newspaper advertisements you have stacked on that shelf. How much over $200 in the past 6 months?" The number hit Garrett like a fist. $200. That was almost a third of his annual profit. Enough to hire another hand for the year. Enough to make real improvements to the ranch. "Can you prove it?" he asked. Anna showed him, line by line comparing invoices to advertised prices, demonstrating the systematic overcharging. It was thorough, detailed work that would have taken him weeks to uncover if he'd even thought to look. "I'll write them a letter," Anna said. "Request a credit for the overcharges and inform them that future invoices will be scrutinized carefully." "Do that." Garrett studied her bent head, the neat handwriting in the ledger, the careful way she'd organized everything. "You're good at this. Numbers make sense. Unlike people, they follow logical rules." Anna's voice held a hint of humor. "Though I suppose that's why I'm better suited to bookkeeping than society." Garrett found himself almost smiling. "Society's loss," he said, then left before she could see his face. That night the crew ate together at the big table, a proper meal Anna had somehow managed to produce despite having only hours to work with. Beef roast potatoes, carrots, bread that was actual bread instead of hockey pucks. The men ate with the enthusiasm of people who'd been starving and didn't know it. Afterward, when the men had gone back to the bunkhouse and Anna was washing dishes, Garrett found himself lingering in the kitchen doorway again, watching her work. She moved with easy efficiency, her hands steady in the soapy water, humming something under her breath. It reminded him of Sarah. Not that Anna was anything like Sarah, they were completely different. But the feeling was the same, the sense of a house being lived in instead of just occupied. The warmth of another presence, the small domestic sounds that made a place feel like home. That's when Garrett realized he was in trouble. One day. Anna Blake had been in his house for one day, and already he could feel the careful walls he'd built starting to crack. Already he was noticing things, appreciating things, starting to hope for things. That was dangerous. Hope was the most dangerous emotion of all. He turned and left before she could see him watching. Went upstairs to his room and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, telling himself this was just practical. She was an employee doing a job. The fact that the house felt less empty with her in it, that was just biology. Humans were social creatures. Of course, having another person around felt different. It didn't mean anything. Couldn't mean anything. Garrett fell asleep still lying to himself and dreamed of Sarah for the first time in months. But when he woke in the morning, it was Anna's face he remembered, not his dead wife's. The first week passed in a blur of work and adjustment. Anna systematically transformed the house, tackling one room at a time with ruthless efficiency. She worked from dawn until well after dark, and Garrett found himself looking for excuses to be in whatever room she was cleaning just to watch her work. She was methodical. Started with the kitchen, got that spotless and organized. Then moved to the parlor, the dining room, his father's office. Each room emerged clean and ordered, showing traces of the home it used to be. She found things Garrett had forgotten existed. His mother's good china in the back of a cabinet, his father's collection of books in a trunk in the corner, small pieces of the past carefully preserved and brought back into use. And she was smart, scary smart. After catching up the books, she'd analyzed the ranch's finances and made suggestions for improving efficiency. Buying from different suppliers, selling cattle at different times to catch better prices. Small changes that added up to significant savings. Hank was delighted. "I told you she was good," he said to Garrett one morning. "Woman's got a head for business." "She does." Garrett agreed reluctantly. He should be grateful. Anna was making his life easier in every measurable way. The house was cleaner, the food was better, the books were organized, and she'd already saved him hundreds of dollars. She was exceeding every expectation. So why did it bother him? Because she was changing things, he realized, making this place feel like a home again. And that meant he'd have to feel things again, have to acknowledge the difference between existing and living, have to face how far he'd fallen and how much he'd given up. Anna Blake was forcing him back to life, whether he wanted it or not. The morning of the 8th day, Garrett woke to find Anna already in the kitchen as usual. But this time she wasn't cooking. She was sitting at the table, wrapped in a shawl, despite the warm morning, staring at nothing. "You all right?" he asked. Anna's head jerked up. "I'm fine, just—" She trailed off. "I had a nightmare. About the robbery. Sometimes I still see Mr. Peterson falling." Garrett poured them both coffee and sat across from her. "That's normal. After violence. The images stick with you. Does it get easier eventually? Maybe. Garrett wrapped his hands around his cup. After my wife and son died, I used to dream about them every night. See them healthy and happy, then wake up and remember they were gone. Worst part of my day, that moment of remembering. Anna's eyes were shadowed. I'm sorry. I can't imagine that kind of loss. Hope you never have to. Garrett met her gaze. But you've had your own losses. Your parents. Yes. Anna's voice was soft. It's not the same as losing a spouse and child. But grief is grief. It takes what it takes. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee as the sun rose outside. Two people who'd both lost too much, finding unexpected kinship in shared pain. Mr. Stone, Anna said eventually, "May I ask you something personal?" "Depends on the question. Why did you agree to let me stay?" "Really, Hank hired me without permission. You would have been justified in sending me away immediately." "But you didn't." Why? Garrett considered the question. Considered lying, giving her some practical answer about needing help with the house. But something about the morning light and the shared vulnerability made him honest instead. "Because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten," he said finally. "What's that?" "That there are people in the world still fighting, still trying. You'd just been robbed, nearly killed, found out your job didn't exist, and you stood in my kitchen and negotiated terms like you had any leverage at all. That took courage. Made me think maybe I'd forgotten what courage looked like." Anna's eyes glistened. "I wasn't brave. I was desperate. Sometimes they're the same thing." Garrett stood suddenly uncomfortable with how much he'd revealed. "I need to check the south pasture. I'll be back for lunch." He left quickly before she could say anything else, before she could see how much that conversation had cost him. Outside, the ranch was coming to life. Men moving between buildings, horses being saddled, the day's work beginning. Normal sounds, normal sights. But Garrett felt off balance, like the ground had shifted under him and he hadn't noticed until now. Hank found him in the barn, checking Storm's hooves with more attention than necessary, Boss Hank said. "Need to talk. Make it quick." "It's about Miss Blake." Hank's voice was careful. "Danny went into Sweetwater yesterday for supplies. Heard talk." "What kind of talk?" "The kind you'd expect. Woman living alone with a bachelor rancher." "People making assumptions." Garrett's hands stilled on Storm's hoof. "What kind of assumptions?" "You can guess." Hank shifted his weight. "Clara Henderson's spreading it around that Miss Blake's your mistress. That the household manager story is just a cover." Rage flared hot in Garrett's chest. "That's a damned lie. We know that. But people believe what they want to believe. And a young woman living in a bachelor's house, no chaperone, no family. It looks bad." Garrett straightened, let Storm's leg down. "So what do we do?" "Could hire a chaperone. Another older woman to live here too. That would make it proper." Garrett shook his head immediately. "More people in the house, more changes, more complications. That's wasteful. Another salary for something that's nobody's business anyway. Then we ride it out. Let the gossips talk themselves tired. Eventually they'll find something else to chew on." "And what about Anna? What about her reputation?" Hank's look was pointed. "That's between you and her boss. But she deserves to know what's being said." Garrett found Anna in the office working on correspondence. She looked up when he entered, smiled slightly, then saw his expression, and the smile faded. "Something's wrong," she said. "There's talk in town." Garrett didn't see the point in dancing around it. "About you living here. People saying you're—" He couldn't finish. "Your mistress." Anna's voice was flat. "Yes, I expected that." "You expected it, Mr. Stone?" "I'm not naive. I knew what people would think when I agreed to stay. An unmarried woman in a bachelor's household. It was never going to look proper." She went back to her writing. "I don't care what small-minded gossips think. But your reputation." "My reputation was ruined when my fiancé ended our engagement and spread rumors that I was the problem. That I couldn't manage money, that I was too willful, too educated, too much trouble." Anna's pen moved steadily across the paper. "I learned then that reputation is just what people decide to believe about you. and people will believe the worst regardless of truth. So I stopped caring. Garrett sat slowly in the chair across from her desk. You're stronger than you look. I've had to be. Anna finished her sentence and set down her pen. The world isn't kind to women alone. You either develop a thick skin or you don't survive. I chose survival. If you want to leave, I'll understand. Anna's eyes flashed. Do you want me to leave? No. Then I'm staying. She picked up her pen again. Unless small-town gossip bothers you more than it bothers me. It doesn't. Good. Then we'll ignore it. Now about these supply orders, I think we should. And just like that, the conversation was over. Anna moved back to business, discussing inventory and expenses as if they hadn't just talked about her reputation being destroyed. As if it didn't matter at all. Garrett left the office feeling something he couldn't quite name. Admiration, maybe, or respect. Anna Blake had been knocked down by life repeatedly and kept getting back up, kept fighting, kept moving forward. She had more courage in her little finger than most men had in their whole bodies. Sunday came and Garrett did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He went to church. Anna had suggested it the night before. If we want to counter the gossip, we should be seen publicly. Show the community that we have nothing to hide. Garrett had wanted to refuse. He'd stopped going to church after Sarah died, couldn't stomach sitting in those pews where they'd sat together listening to platitudes about God's plan and mysterious ways. But Anna was right. Hiding only made them look guilty. So Sunday morning found them driving into Sweetwater in the ranch wagon, both dressed in their best clothes. Anna wore her mother's blue silk dress, carefully mended where it had torn during her flight from the outlaws. Garrett wore a suit that had belonged to his father, a bit tight in the shoulders, but serviceable. The small white church sat at the edge of town, surrounded by a cemetery where many of Sweetwater's original settlers rested, including Garrett's parents, and Sarah, and little James. Garrett hadn't visited their graves since that evening he'd placed wildflowers there before Anna arrived. Couldn't bring himself to look at those headstones now. Anna seemed to sense his discomfort. She placed her hand on his arm as they walked up the church steps, a small gesture of support that steadied him more than it should have. Conversation stopped when they entered. Heads turned, eyes assessed. Garrett felt the weight of judgment and speculation, felt Anna stiffen beside him. But she kept walking head high until they reached a pew near the front. Garrett's family pew, empty for 5 years because he hadn't been there to fill it. Anna slid in and Garrett followed, and together they sat in that pew like they had every right to be there. Because they did. The service passed in a blur. Garrett heard none of it, too aware of the whispers behind them. The stairs, the way Clara Henderson kept looking back from her pew 3 rows ahead, her mouth pinched in disapproval. But he was also aware of Anna beside him, the way she sat straight and proud, the way her voice joined in the hymns clear and pure, the way she refused to shrink or hide despite knowing what people were saying. After the service they ran the gauntlet of church ladies. Most were polite but cool. Some ignored them entirely. Clara Henderson was the only one bold enough to say something directly. "Miss Blake," she said, her tone dripping false sweetness. "How unusual to see you here. Mr. Stone hasn't attended services in years." "I like to attend church when possible," Anna replied evenly. "And Mr. Stone was kind enough to accompany me." "I'm sure he was kind." Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I imagine he's been very kind giving you a place in his home, though one does wonder about the propriety." Anna's spine went rigid, but her voice stayed calm. "One might also wonder about the propriety of gossiping in God's house, Mrs. Henderson, but I suppose we all have our particular sins." Clara's face flushed red. "Well, I never. No, I don't suppose you have." Anna took Garrett's arm. "Good day, Mrs. Henderson. I'm sure we'll see you next Sunday." She swept away head high, leaving Clara sputtering. Garrett followed, torn between horror and admiration. "You just made an enemy," he said when they were out of earshot. "I had one already." Anna climbed into the wagon. "At least now she knows I won't be intimidated." The ride back to Ironheart was quiet. Garrett kept glancing at Anna, seeing the tight set of her jaw, the way her hands gripped her skirts. She was upset despite her brave front. Anyone would be. "You handled that well," he said finally. "Did I?" Anna's laugh was bitter. I probably made everything worse. You stood your ground. That takes courage. Or stupidity. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. They were almost back to the ranch when Anna spoke again so softly Garrett almost didn't hear. Thank you for taking me. I know that must have been difficult for you. Why would it be difficult? Because you haven't been to church since your wife died. Anna met his eyes. Hank told me about how you used to go every Sunday with your family, how you stopped after, how much you loved them. Garrett's throat tightened. Hank talks too much. He cares about you. Anna's voice was gentle. And he's right. You did love them. Anyone can see that. The house still shows traces of your wife everywhere. The way you keep fresh flowers on their graves. The way you've preserved your son's room exactly as it was. You went in his room, I dust everywhere. I couldn't help but notice. Anna paused. I'm not trying to replace them, Mr. Stone. I know I never could. I never thought you were. Good, because they were clearly wonderful people who loved you very much. And you loved them. That kind of love doesn't just disappear because someone dies. She looked away out at the passing landscape. My father loved my mother so much that when she died, he followed within months. The doctors said heart attack, but I think it was grief. I think he just couldn't imagine living without her. Garrett understood that impulse. Those first months after Sarah died, he'd thought about it. Walking into the barn and putting a rope over a rafter. Quick, simple an end to the endless gray pain. But he hadn't. Some stubborn survival instinct, or maybe just inertia, kept him breathing. Now driving back to Ironheart with Anna beside him, he was glad he'd survived. Glad he'd kept going through those dark months. Because if he hadn't, he wouldn't be here now. Wouldn't have met this strange, strong woman who'd crashed into his life and refused to leave. The thought scared him. He was starting to depend on her presence, starting to notice her absence when she wasn't around, starting to listen for her footsteps in the morning, to look forward to meals they shared, to appreciate the small ways she'd made his house feel like a home again. That was dangerous. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. The more you loved, the more it hurt when you lost it. And everyone lost everything eventually. 2 weeks passed. Anna settled deeper into Ironheart, and the house continued its transformation. She'd found curtains his mother made, washed and mended them, hung them in the windows. Found rugs rolled up in the attic, beat them clean, spread them on floors. Small touches that added up to something bigger, something like care. The crew loved her. Danny followed her around like a puppy, offering to help with everything. The other hands tipped their hats when they passed her, offered to carry things, treated her with a combination of respect and shy adoration. Garrett watched it all and felt something twist in his chest. Jealousy, maybe. Or possessiveness. She was his. His employee, his responsibility. Not theirs. Except she wasn't his. She was her own person, free to smile at whoever she wanted. Free to accept help from young Danny with his earnest face. Free to laugh at jokes the men made over dinner. She wasn't his wife. Wasn't his anything beyond an employee. But Garrett's heart didn't seem to understand that distinction. One evening, 2 weeks after Anna arrived, Garrett came in from a long day of work to find her in the kitchen cooking dinner. She was singing softly, something he'd never heard before, and the sound stopped him in his tracks. It was a hymn, he realized, one his mother used to sing while she worked. Anna's voice was different from his mother's, lower and smokier, but the tune was the same. And hearing it now in his mother's kitchen made something crack open in Garrett's chest. He must have made a sound because Anna turned, saw him standing in the doorway. "Oh, I didn't hear you come in. Dinner's almost ready." "That song," Garrett said. "Where did you learn it, Church? My mother used to sing it too." Anna wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm sorry, does it bother you?" "No. It's—" Garrett couldn't find the words. "My mother sang that. In this kitchen." Anna's expression softened. "I can stop if it's painful." "Don't. Please. It's—" He stopped, started again. "It's nice. Hearing music in this house again." Their eyes met across the kitchen. The air between them felt charged, somehow heavy with things unspoken. Anna was the first to look away, turning back to the stove. "Well, dinner will be ready soon. You should wash up." Garrett fled before he could do something stupid. Like tell her how much her presence meant to him, like admit how much he'd started to need her here, like confess that the thought of her ever leaving made something panic in his chest. He washed up in the yard, pumping cold water over his head and neck, trying to shock himself back to sense. This was bad, this growing attachment. He needed to stop it now before it went any further. But at dinner, sitting across from Anna, while she served food to the crew, watching her laugh at something Hank said, Garrett knew it was already too late. He was falling for her, and there wasn't a damned thing he could do about it. The crisis came suddenly, as crises often do. Marcus Rodriguez, one of the older hands, got thrown from a green-broke horse and landed badly. His leg bent at an angle that made even hardened ranchmen turn pale. Anna was the one who stayed calm. She'd been in the yard when it happened, saw the fall. While the men stood around swearing and arguing about what to do, Anna knelt beside Marcus and examined the injury with steady hands. "His leg is broken," she said. "We need to splint it before we move him. Someone fetch straight boards and strips of cloth. Now!" The men jumped to obey, responding to the authority in her voice. Within minutes, Anna had the leg splinted properly, had organized the men to lift Marcus carefully, had him installed in a bed in the bunkhouse with instructions to keep still. "Someone ride for the doctor," she ordered. "And you, Danny, stay with Marcus. Keep him calm. Talk to him. Don't let him thrash around." When Dr. Miller arrived from Sweetwater 2 hours later, he examined the leg and looked at Anna with something like respect. "Who did this splinting I did?" Anna said. The doctor nodded. "Excellent work. Probably saved the leg. If he'd been moved without stabilization first, could have damaged it beyond repair." Later, after the doctor left with instructions for Marcus's care, Garrett found Anna behind the house, hands shaking, breathing fast. He recognized a delayed reaction to crisis. He'd had them himself. "You did good today," he said. Anna shook her head. "I was terrified. I just remembered what my mother taught me and hoped I was doing it right." "You were. Marcus is going to be fine because of you." Anna looked up at him, and something in her eyes made Garrett's breath catch. "Do you know what I thought when I saw him fall? I thought not again. Not more death. Not more loss. I couldn't bear it. It wasn't death. You prevented that. But it could have been. Just like Mr. Peterson on the stagecoach. Just like your wife and son. Just like my parents. People die, Mr. Stone, all the time, for no reason, and we just have to keep going." Her voice broke on the last word. And then Anna Blake, who'd been strong through robbery and gossip and hard work, who'd faced down Clara Henderson and taken care of a ranch full of men without flinching, finally broke. She cried hard, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep. Crying for Marcus, for Peterson, for her parents, for all the accumulated grief she'd been carrying alone. Garrett stood frozen for a moment, uncertain. Then instinct took over, and he pulled her into his arms, held her while she cried against his chest. She felt small and fragile in his arms, but Garrett knew better. Anna Blake wasn't fragile. She was steel-wrapped in silk, strong enough to bend without breaking. She was just tired of being strong alone. So he held her and let her cry and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. Sometimes you just had to let the grief out before it poisoned you from the inside. When Anna finally quieted, she pulled back, wiped her eyes, wouldn't meet his gaze. "I'm sorry. That was unprofessional. That was human." Garrett's hands were still on her shoulders. "You've been through hell these past weeks. You're allowed to break down. So are you." The words hit Garrett like a punch. "So are you." As if she knew he'd been holding it together for 5 years through sheer stubbornness. As if she understood the cost of never letting himself feel anything. "I should check on Marcus," Anna said, stepping back. "Make sure he's comfortable." She left quickly, and Garrett let her go. But he stood there for a long time, hands still tingling from where he'd held her heart pounding, with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite hope. He was in so much trouble. More trouble than he'd been in 5 years. because Anna Blake had somehow slipped past every defense he'd built, and now he couldn't imagine his life without her in it. That night Garrett lay in bed and admitted the truth. He was falling in love with his household manager, with the woman who'd shown up on his doorstep broken and desperate and refusing to quit, with the woman who sang his mother's hymns and kept his books and made his house feel like a home again. He was falling in love, and it terrified him, because the last woman he'd loved had died in his arms, and the thought of going through that again, of losing someone else, it was almost enough to make him push Anna away right now while he still could. Almost, but not quite, because for the first time in 5 years, Garrett Stone felt alive, actually truly alive, and that was worth the risk, even if it killed him. The tension that had been building between Garrett and Anna reached a breaking point on a cool October evening 3 weeks after she'd arrived at Ironheart Ranch. They were in the office going over supply orders when Garrett made the mistake of standing too close while looking at the ledger over her shoulder. He could smell lavender soap in her hair, could feel the warmth radiating from her body, could hear the slight catch in her breathing that said she was as aware of him as he was of her. "Anna," he said quietly. She turned her head, and their faces were suddenly inches apart, her eyes widened, pupils dilating. For one suspended moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, the space between them charged with possibility. Then boots thundered on the porch, and Hank burst through the door without knocking, shattering the moment like glass. Boss Ryder coming fast. Garrett stepped back from Anna so quickly he almost knocked over the desk chair. Both of them were breathing hard, faces flushed. Hank's eyes darted between them, and his weathered face creased in something between satisfaction and concern. The rider turned out to be Sheriff Ben Hayes from Sweetwater, a man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much frontier violence. He dismounted heavily and accepted the water Hank offered, drank deep, then turned to Garrett with grim expression. "Stone. Miss Blake. Got bad news." Garrett's gut tightened. "What happened?" "The Finch gang hit Graham Morrison's place last night, burned his barn, killed 2 horses. Beat Morrison himself bad when he tried to stop them. His wife and daughters are fine, but they're terrified. Morrison was a neighbor, owned a spread 10 miles west. Good man, hard-working, with a wife and 3 young daughters." The thought of them terrorized made rage bloom hot in Garrett's chest. "How bad is Morrison hurt?" "Bad enough. Broken ribs, may be worse. Doc Miller's with him now." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "But that ain't the worst of it. Finch left a message. Said to tell you you're next. Said something about collecting what's his." Anna went pale. She knows what that means. The carpet bag she'd refused to give up. Finch still wanted it, or more likely wanted her. Men like Edmund Finch didn't forget being humiliated. They nursed grudges and waited for chances to even scores. "You forming a posse?" Garrett asked. "Leaving at dawn. Need good men who can ride and shoot." The sheriff looked at Garrett steadily. "I know it's a lot to ask, Stone, but Morrison's your neighbor, and Finch is escalating. If we don't stop him now, he'll keep hitting ranches until he gets to yours anyway. I'm in." Garrett didn't hesitate. "When do we ride first light? Bring your rifle and plenty of ammunition. This could get ugly." After the sheriff left, Garrett began preparing, checking his Winchester, filling saddlebags with supplies, making sure Storm was properly fed and rested. Anna watched from the doorway, arms crossed, face tight with worry. "You don't have to do this," she said finally. "Yes, I do. Morrison's my neighbor. This is my responsibility. Your responsibility is to this ranch, to your crew, not to chase outlaws through the hills." Garrett stopped what he was doing and faced her. "Anna, if I don't help stop Finch now, he'll come here eventually. You know that. He made threats against you specifically. Would you rather I wait until he's burning our barn?" "Our barn." The possessive pronoun slipped out without thought. Anna noticed her expression flickering with something Garrett couldn't read. "I just don't want you to get hurt," she said quietly. "I'll be careful. That's not a promise you can make." Anna's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. "Men die, Mr. Stone. They ride out on posies and don't come back. I've already lost too many people. I don't want to lose you, too." The raw honesty in her words hit Garrett square in the chest. "You won't lose me. You can't know that. Then I'll try my damnedest to make it true." Garrett took a step toward her. "Anna, I have to do this. Can you understand?" She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand. I just don't like it." That night Garrett couldn't sleep. He lay in bed thinking about the posse, about Finch, about the violence that was coming. But mostly he thought about Anna, about the fear in her eyes when she'd begged him not to go, about how much it had cost her to admit she didn't want to lose him, about how much he didn't want to lose her either. Around midnight, unable to stand his own thoughts anymore, Garrett went downstairs for water, found Anna in the kitchen wrapped in a shawl despite the warmth, staring at nothing. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. Anna shook her head. "Keep thinking about tomorrow, about what could happen." Garrett poured them both water and sat across from her. "It'll be fine. Sheriff knows what he's doing. The last time someone told me everything would be fine, my mother died 3 days later." Anna's voice was flat. "Forgive me if I don't find that reassuring." "Fair enough." Garrett drank his water. "Anna, there's something I need to tell you, in case tomorrow goes badly." "Don't." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "Don't say goodbye. That makes it real. I'm not saying goodbye. I'm saying—" Garrett struggled for words. "I'm saying these past weeks, having you here, it's been—" He stopped, started again. "For 5 years I've been half dead, just existing. Then you showed up and suddenly I remembered what it feels like to actually live, to want to wake up in the morning, to look forward to something besides more work." Anna was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Garrett reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold and he wrapped both his hands around them, trying to warm them. "What I'm trying to say is thank you, for reminding me I'm still alive, for making this house feel like a home again, for being brave and stubborn and refusing to quit even when you had every reason to." "Garrett." Anna's voice broke on his name. "I'm coming back," he promised. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm coming back. Because we're not done yet, you and me. We're just getting started." He stood still, holding her hand, and Anna rose too. For a moment they stood there in the dark kitchen, hands clasped barely a foot apart. Garrett could count her heartbeats in the pulse at her wrist, could see the way her breath came fast and shallow. He should let go, should step back, should maintain the proper distance between employer and employee. Instead, he raised his free hand and touched her cheek, wiping away tears with his thumb. Anna's breath hitched and her eyes fluttered closed. She leaned into his touch like a flower turning toward sun. "Garrett," she whispered. He kissed her, soft and gentle at first, just a brush of lips. Anna made a small sound and kissed him back, her free hand coming up to grip his shirt. The kiss deepened, becoming something desperate and honest and full of all the things they'd been too scared to say. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "That was—" he started. "A mistake." Anna's voice was small. "No, the opposite of a mistake." Garrett pulled back enough to look at her. "Anna, when I get back we need to talk. About this. About us. There's an us I think there might be. If you want there to be." Anna's smile was tremulous but real. "I want there to be." "Then that's settled." Garrett kissed her again, softer this time. "Now go to bed. Get some rest. We'll figure everything else out when I get back. You promise you're coming back, I promise." "On my life, Anna. I'm coming back to you." Anna nodded and left, looking back once from the doorway before disappearing upstairs. Garrett stood alone in the dark kitchen, fingers touching his lips where hers had been, and felt something like joy unfurl in his chest. He had a reason to survive tomorrow now. A very good reason. The posse rode out at dawn. 8 men, including Garrett and Sheriff Hayes, all armed with rifles and grim determination. They followed the tracks left by Finch's gang heading northeast toward the Badlands where outlaws often hid. Anna watched from the porch as they rode away. Garrett turned once, caught her eye, touched his hat brim in salute. She raised her hand in return, face pale but composed. Then they crested the hill, and she was gone from sight. For 3 hours they tracked in silence. The trail was obvious, almost contemptuous in how little effort Finch had made to hide it. Either he was supremely confident, or he was leading them into a trap. Probably both, Garrett thought grimly. Around mid-morning they found the camp, tucked into a canyon with only one easy way in smoke rising from a dying fire. The sheriff called a halt, and the men dismounted, approaching on foot with rifles ready. "Too easy," muttered one of the other ranchers, a man named Johnson. "They want us to find them." "Or they're just arrogant," the sheriff replied. "Either way, we're going in. Stone, you and Morrison take the left flank. Johnson, you're with me up the middle. Rest of you spread out and cover the exits." They moved into position. The camp appeared empty at first, just scattered bedrolls and supplies. Then movement caught Garrett's eye. A figure rising from behind rocks, rifle already aimed. "Ambush!" Garrett shouted, diving for cover as gunfire erupted. The canyon became chaos, muzzle flashes and gun smoke, men shouting, horses screaming. Garrett fired from behind a boulder, saw one of Finch's men go down, returned fire, kicked chips of rock into his face, and he ducked, chambered another round, came up shooting. Where the hell was Finch there? On the far side of the canyon, Edmund Finch himself, that scarred face twisted in a grin as he fired methodically. Garrett tracked him through his sights, but Finch ducked behind cover before he could shoot. The battle lasted maybe 10 minutes, but felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Finch's men were dead, 1 wounded and captured. But Finch himself had escaped with 2 others riding hard toward the eastern hills. Sheriff Hayes swore colorfully. "We had him. We had him right there." "He was ready for us," Garrett said, reloading his Winchester. "This whole thing was a setup. Then we follow." The sheriff's face was set. "Before the trail goes cold." But one of the posse members, an older rancher named Peters, was hit. Bullet through the shoulder, bleeding bad. Someone needed to get him back to Sweetwater to the doctor. "I'll take him," Garrett offered. The sheriff shook his head. "Need you with us, Stone. You're the best shot we've got. Peters can ride double with Thompson. Rest of us keep going." They buried the dead outlaws in shallow graves and left markers. Then they were back on horses following Finch's trail deeper into rough country. By afternoon they were in true Badlands, all broken rock and hidden canyons. Perfect ambush territory. Garrett's mind kept drifting back to Anna, to their kiss in the dark kitchen, to the promise he'd made, to the life he could see taking shape if he just survived long enough to claim it. Focus, he told himself. Stay alive first. Plan for the future later. They found Finch's second camp at dusk. This time they were more cautious, scouting carefully before moving in. But again the camp was empty except for tracks leading away. Finch was staying just ahead of them, running but not panicking. "He's leading us somewhere," Garrett said. "Somewhere he wants us to be." Agreed. The sheriff studied the terrain. Question is where and why. They made camp themselves, cold camp, with no fire to give away their position. Men took turns on watch while others tried to sleep. Garrett drew first watch, sitting with his rifle across his knees, scanning the darkness. He was thinking about Anna when the first gunshot cracked through the night. Chaos erupted again. Muzzle flashes in the darkness. Men scrambling for weapons. Garrett fired at shadows, heard screams that might have been human or might have been his imagination. When dawn came, 2 more posse members were wounded, one seriously, and Finch was gone again, melted away into the Badlands like smoke. "We can't keep this up," Johnson said, bandaging a graze on his arm. "He's picking us apart. We need to get the wounded back to town." The sheriff looked at Garrett. "What do you think Stone?" Garrett thought about Anna waiting at Iron Heart. Thought about the promise he'd made. Thought about how stupid he'd be to die out here chasing a ghost. "We go back," he said. "Regroup. Come at this different." The ride back to Sweetwater took all day. They arrived at dusk, dusty and defeated, and 3 men short. The wounded went to Dr. Miller. The rest scattered to their own ranches. Garrett rode for Iron Heart like the devil was chasing him, needing to see Anna to prove to himself and to her that he'd survived. But as he crested the final hill overlooking his ranch, something made him pull up short. Smoke. thin tendrils rising from the north pasture. And as he watched, the wind shifted, and he could see flames. Orange tongues licking at dry grass spreading fast in the October breeze. No. Garrett spurred Storm into a gallop, racing down the hill toward his ranch, toward Anna, toward home. He could see figures in the yard now, his crew forming bucket lines from the well, and there was Anna right in the middle of it, passing buckets with the men dress soaked and hair coming loose from its pins. She looked up and saw him coming. Relief and terror warred on her face. Garrett dismounted at a run. What happened? Finch Hank panted, passing another bucket. His gang showed up an hour ago, set the north pasture on fire, and rode off laughing. Anyone hurt? Marcus took a bullet. Hank gestured toward the house. He's inside. Not fatal, but he's bleeding bad. Miss Blake got him stabilized, but he needs the doctor. The doctor's in Sweetwater dealing with the wounded from our posse. Garrett grabbed a bucket, joined the line. How bad is the fire? Bad. Wind's pushing it toward the buildings. If it reaches the barn, we'll lose everything. They fought the fire for hours. Desperate, exhausting work that left them all coughing from smoke and burned in places where embers had landed on clothes and skin. But slowly, painfully, they brought it under control. Dug fire breaks. Doused hot spots. By full dark, they had it contained to the north pasture. 20 acres of good grazing land turned to ash, but the buildings saved. Garrett found Anna sitting on the porch steps, face black with soot, hands blistered from bucket handles. She looked up when his shadow fell over her and burst into tears. "You're alive. You came back." He sat beside her and pulled her against his chest, felt her shake with exhausted sobs. Behind them the ranch smoldered and stank of smoke. Around them his crew collapsed where they stood, too tired to make it to their bunks. It was one of the worst days of Garrett's life. But Anna was alive. His men were alive. The ranch still stood. They'd survived. "I thought I lost you," Anna said against his chest. "When the fire started and you weren't here, I thought they'd killed you and come here to finish the job. I'm here. I'm alive." Garrett's voice was hoarse from smoke and shouting. "Anna, we need to end this. Finch isn't going to stop. I know. He's escalating. Next time he might not just burn the pasture. Next time he might burn the house, with you in it." Anna pulled back and looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "So what do? We set a trap, use you as bait." "Absolutely not." "Anna." Garrett took her blistered hands carefully. "He wants you. We know that. So we give him what he wants, but on our terms, our ground, with the sheriff and every able man in the territory ready to take him down. You want to use me as bait to draw out a killer?" "Yes." Anna was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "All right, let's do it." The plan came together over the next 2 days. Sheriff Hayes agreed despite his misgivings. They'd stage it at Ironheart where they knew the ground. Anna would be visible working in the garden, apparently alone. The sheriff and his deputies would hide in the house. Garrett and his crew would be concealed around the property. When Finch showed up, they'd surround him. It was dangerous. Finch was crazy but not stupid. He might smell the trap, or he might come with his whole gang and overpower them through sheer numbers. But it was the only way to end this, and everyone was tired of living in fear. The morning of the trap, Garrett found Anna in the garden planting late-season vegetables. She looked calm, almost serene, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands shook slightly as she worked. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Yes, I do." Anna straightened and met his eyes. "I'm tired of running, Garrett. Tired of being afraid. If this is how we end it, then let's end it. If anything happens to you, it won't. You'll be there. The sheriff will be there. We'll be ready." Garrett wanted to argue, wanted to call the whole thing off. But Anna was right. They couldn't live like this, always looking over their shoulders, waiting for Finch to strike. "After this is over," he said, "after we deal with Finch, there's something I need to ask you." Anna's lips curved in a small smile. "Then you better survive to ask it. Plan to." They waited all morning. The sun climbed high and hot. Anna worked in the garden, visible from any approach. Garrett crouched in the hayloft with his rifle, sweating in the heat, every muscle tense. Noon came and went. Then early afternoon, Maybe Finch wasn't coming. Maybe he'd moved on to easier prey. Then Garrett saw them. 5 riders approaching from the north, making no attempt at stealth. Edmund Finch in the lead, that scarred face visible even at distance. "They're here," Garrett called softly. His voice carried to the hidden men. 5 riders. "Get ready." In the garden, Anna froze, then deliberately turned back to her planting, giving no sign she'd seen them. Brave woman. Garrett's heart hammered against his ribs. The riders circled closer. Garrett could hear them now, Finch's voice carrying across the yard. "Well, well, the little fighter. Thought about you every day, darling." Anna stood slowly and faced them. She didn't run, didn't scream, just stood there with a trowel in one hand, chin up. "You can leave now, Mr. Finch. There's nothing for you here." "Oh, I disagree." Finch dismounted, gestured for his men to spread out. "I think you owe me. For that bag you stole. For the trouble you caused. For making me look like a fool in front of my boys. I don't owe you anything. The hell you don't." Finch's hand moved toward his gun. "Now you can come peaceful, or I can make this hard. Your choice." That's when Garrett stood up in the hayloft rifle aimed at Finch's center mass. Actually, he called down, "The choice is yours, Finch. You can ride away right now, or you can die here." Finch whirled, saw Garrett, then saw the sheriff emerging from the house with his deputies. Saw ranch hands appearing from behind buildings and fences, all armed. His face went purple with rage. "You set me up. You made it easy." Garrett's finger was steady on the trigger. "Now drop your weapons and surrender, or we drop you where you stand." For a moment Garrett thought it might work, thought Finch might actually surrender. But then he saw the calculation in those cold eyes, saw the moment the outlaw decided he'd rather die fighting. Finch's hand blurred toward his pistol. Garrett fired. The rifle kicked against his shoulder and Finch's hat flew off, the bullet missing by inches, only because Finch was already moving, diving for cover behind his horse. Then everyone was shooting. The gunfight was brief and brutal. Finch's men scattered trying to find cover. 2 went down in the first volley. The sheriff's deputies fired from the house windows. Ranch hands closed in from multiple sides. "You know what, Stone?" Finch's voice echoed in the dim barn. "Your daddy cost me everything. James Stone fired me 7 years back, called me a thief just for taking what I earned. So I came back one night and put a bullet in his chest while he begged for his life." Garrett's blood ran cold. You killed my father, watched him bleed out on his own porch, and now I'm going to do the same to you. Then I'll take your woman and burn this place to the ground like I should have done back then." Rage exploded in Garrett's chest. His father's death wasn't random. It was murder. By Finch. Finch himself, that bastard, somehow made it to the barn. Garrett saw him disappear inside and swore. The barn was full of hay and dry wood. If Finch was desperate enough, he might burn it. Garrett climbed down from the hayloft and ran for the barn. Behind him he heard shouting, more gunfire. One of Finch's men was trying to get to Anna, but Danny tackled him, both of them going down in a tangle of fists and dust. The barn was dim after the bright sunlight. Garrett paused just inside the door, letting his eyes adjust, rifle up and ready. Where was Finch? Movement to his left. Garrett spun, but too slow. Finch hit him like a battering ram, knocking the rifle from his hands. They went down hard, Finch's fists already swinging. They fought in the dirt and straw, brutal close-quarters combat with no rules. Finch pulled a knife. Garrett caught his wrist, held the blade away from his throat muscles, shaking with effort. "You should have minded your own business, Stone." Finch's breath was hot and rank in Garrett's face. "Should have let me have the woman. Now you both die. Like hell." Garrett got his knee up, shoved Finch back, scrambled to his feet. Finch came at him again, knife slashing. The blade caught Garrett across the ribs, hot pain blooming, but Garrett grabbed a shovel leaning against the wall and swung it like a club. The flat of the shovel caught Finch in the face. The outlaw went down, blood pouring from his broken nose. But he was already getting back up, that knife still in his hand, murder in his eyes. Then Anna appeared in the barn doorway, holding Garrett's rifle. She didn't hesitate, didn't call out a warning, just raised the weapon and fired. The bullet took Finch in the chest. He looked down at the spreading blood, then at Anna, then back at the blood. His legs buckled and he fell knife clattering from nerveless fingers. "You," he gasped. "You shot me." "I did." Anna's voice was steady despite the tears on her face. "And I'd do it again." Finch tried to say something else, but only blood came out. Then his eyes went glassy, and he was gone. The silence after the gunfire was deafening. Garrett stumbled toward Anna, and she dropped the rifle, caught him as he sagged. The knife wound was bleeding, but not fatal. He'd been lucky. 2 days after Edmund Finch died in the barn, a young man rode into Ironheart Ranch. He dismounted slowly, hands visible and empty, and stood in the yard waiting to be noticed. Garrett saw him from the porch, and his hand moved instinctively toward his rifle. The stranger was young, maybe 23, with Finch family features unmistakable in the set of his jaw. "Mr. Stone," the young man called. "My name's Caleb Finch. I'm Edmund's younger brother." Every ranch hand in earshot froze. Garrett's finger found the trigger. "I ain't here for trouble," Caleb said quickly. "I heard what happened. Heard Edmund and Luther both died trying to hurt you and Miss Blake." He paused. "I'm here to say I'm sorry, and to ask if you'd consider hiring me." The silence stretched. Then Anna appeared on the porch beside Garrett. "Why would we hire a Finch?" Garrett asked, voice hard. "Because I'm not like my brothers. Never was." Caleb's voice was steady despite the rifles pointed at him. "Been in prison in Kansas these past 2 years. Got out, heard what Edmund and Luther done. Made me sick. I want to prove a Finch can be different." Anna studied him. "What were you in prison for?" "Horse theft. I was 18 and stupid. Did my time. Learned my lesson." Caleb met her eyes. "Miss Blake, I know you shot both my brothers, and I'm saying they deserved it. What they did to you, to Mr. Stone, to this territory. I'm ashamed to share their name." Garrett felt Anna's hand on his arm. She leaned close and whispered, "Let's give him a chance." "Are you insane?" Garrett hissed back. "Maybe, but cycles have to break somewhere." Anna raised her voice. "Mr. Finch will hire you. On probation. 3 months. You cause any trouble, you're gone. Understood?" Caleb's face showed naked relief. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet," Garrett said coldly. "You'll get the hardest jobs, the longest hours, and we'll be watching every move you make." "I understand, sir. Won't let you down." 6 months later, Caleb Finch was a trusted member of the crew, the man who broke the cycle. "You saved my life," he said. "We're even now." Anna's hands were gentle, examining the wound. "You saved mine first." Outside, the last of Finch's gang had surrendered or been killed. The sheriff was binding prisoners. Ranch hands were checking each other for injuries. It was over. Really, finally, over. Dr. Miller arrived an hour later and stitched Garrett's side while Anna hovered and fussed. The wound was shallow, would heal clean. He'd have a scar, but scars were the price of survival. That evening, after the sheriff had hauled away the dead and the living, after statements had been taken and the last of the excitement had died down, Garrett found Anna on the porch. She was staring at nothing, arms wrapped around herself. He sat beside her. She didn't look at him. "I killed a man," she said quietly. "I know. I can still see his face, the way he looked when the bullet hit. The blood." "I know," Garrett said again. "It never goes away entirely, but it gets easier." "Does it? Because right now I feel like a murderer." "You're not." Garrett took her hand. "You're a survivor. Finch would have killed me. Would have killed you. You did what you had to do." Anna leaned against his shoulder. "I just want this to be over. All of it. The violence and the fear and the constant looking over our shoulders. I just want peace. We have it now. Finch is dead. His gang is scattered. It's over." "Is it?" Anna looked up at him. "Or are there always more outlaws, more threats, more fights?" "Probably," Garrett admitted. "This is the frontier, Anna. It's hard and dangerous and sometimes violent, but it's also beautiful and free and full of possibility, and I don't want to live it with anyone but you." Anna's breath caught. "What are you saying?" That evening, before finding Anna, Garrett had ridden up to the hill alone. He stood before Sarah's grave in the fading light. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I'm going to ask Anna to marry me. I hope you'd understand. You'll always be my first love, the mother of my son. But Anna, she brought me back to life, and I think you'd have liked her. She's strong like you were, stubborn, brave." The wind whispered through the grass. No answer came, but Garrett felt something ease in his chest, like permission granted, like blessing given. He touched the headstone once more, then rode back down to ask Anna Blake to be his wife. Garrett slid off the porch step and knelt on the ground in front of her, pulled from his pocket a small box he'd been carrying for days, waiting for the right moment. Opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "This was my mother's ring. My father gave it to her when they married, and she wore it every day until she died." Garrett's voice was steady despite his racing heart. "Anna Blake. I know this isn't romantic. I know we're both covered in blood and soot and probably smell like gunpowder, but I don't want to wait anymore. Life's too short and too uncertain. So I'm asking now, will you marry me?" Anna stared at the ring, then at him, then back at the ring. Tears streamed down her face. "Yes. Yes, Garrett Stone, I'll marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Then Anna was pulling him up, kissing him despite the pain in his side, laughing and crying at the same time. Around them, the ranch hands who'd been pretending not to watch broke into cheers. Hank was grinning like a fool. Danny was actually jumping up and down. Garrett kissed Anna again, tasting salt from her tears, and thought about how far they'd both come. From broken strangers to this, to love and partnership and a future together. The wedding happened fast, 3 weeks later in Sweetwater's little church. Anna wore a dress Clara Henderson had made as a peace offering. Garrett wore his father's suit, properly fitted this time. Hank stood as best man. Emily came all the way from Montana with her family. The whole town turned out. Even Clara, who dabbed at her eyes during the vows and admitted afterward that she'd been wrong about Anna. Reverend Wilson performed the ceremony. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed Anna like he'd been waiting his whole life to do it, which in a way he had. The reception was at Iron Heart, the house decorated with autumn flowers and filled with food Anna and the ranch wives had prepared. Music played, people danced, children ran wild. It was everything a wedding should be. But the best moment came later, after the guests had left and Garrett and Anna were alone in the house that was now officially theirs together. "We did it," Anna said, looking down at the ring on her finger. "We survived everything and made it here. We did." Garrett pulled her close. "And now we have the rest of our lives to figure out what comes next." "I already know what comes next." Anna smiled up at him. "We rebuild the north pasture, expand the herd, maybe hire another hand or two, turn Iron Heart into the most successful ranch in the territory. That's the plan, is it?" "That's the plan." Anna's smile turned mischievous. "Oh, and babies. Eventually. When we're ready." Garrett's breath caught. "Babies, if you want them. I know it's hard after James. But I think your father's legacy deserves to continue, and I think you'd be a wonderful father." He kissed her again, soft and sweet. "I think I'd like that. In time." In time, Anna agreed. They had time now, all the time in the world. The violence was behind them. The future stretched ahead, full of possibility. 3 months later, on a cold December day, Anna told Garrett she was pregnant. He cried, holding her and their unborn child, overwhelmed by joy and terror in equal measure. The pregnancy was difficult. Anna was sick for weeks. Garrett hovered like a mother hen, driving her crazy with his overprotectiveness. But she was patient with him, understanding his fear. Understanding that after losing one family, the thought of losing another was almost unbearable. The baby came on Christmas Eve, a boy with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They named him James after Garrett's first son, James Stone II, born into a house full of love and warmth and hope. Garrett held his son and felt something heal in his chest, something that had been broken for 8 years since the first James died. This didn't replace what he'd lost. Nothing could. But it gave him something new to love, new purpose, new reason to wake up grateful every morning. Anna recovered quickly from the birth. Within weeks, she was back to running the household now with a baby on her hip. The ranch hands doted on young James. Hank became an unofficial grandfather. Even Caleb Finch, who'd shown up 6 months earlier looking for work and redemption, proved himself trustworthy enough to hold the baby. Yes, Caleb Finch, Edmund's younger brother. He'd arrived in spring hat in hand, asking for a chance to prove he wasn't like his brothers. Garrett had wanted to refuse. But Anna had seen something in the young man's eyes. Some desperate desire to be different, to break the cycle of violence his family was known for. So they'd hired him on probation. Given him the hardest jobs, the longest hours, watched him like hawks. And Caleb had met every challenge, worked twice as hard as anyone else, never complained, never caused trouble. By the time James was born, Caleb was a full member of the crew. Trusted, respected, no longer judged by his last name. Ironheart Ranch thrived. The herd grew. The finances stabilized and then improved. Anna's business sense combined with Garrett's ranching knowledge made them formidable partners. Within 2 years, they'd paid off old debts and started saving for expansion. And they were happy. Actually, genuinely happy. The kind of happiness that comes from shared struggle and hard-won peace. The kind of love that grows from respect and partnership and choosing each other every single day. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Garrett took Anna up to the hill where his family was buried. They stood together looking at the 4 graves. Sarah, first James, Garrett's parents. "I used to come here and feel nothing but pain," Garrett said. "Now I come here and feel grateful. Grateful for the time I had with them. Grateful they shaped me into someone worthy of you." Anna leaned against him. "They'd be proud of you, of what you've built, of the man you've become." "We've built," Garrett corrected. "You're as much a part of this ranch as I am. More probably. You saved it as much as you saved me." Below them, Ironheart Ranch spread across the valley, cattle grazing peacefully, buildings in good repair, smoke rising from the chimney of the house that was now truly a home. In the yard, Hank was teaching young James to ride a gentle mare, the boy's laughter carrying on the wind. This was what they'd fought for, this peace, this life, this family, and it was worth every scar, every tear, every moment of fear. Garrett Stone had asked for a cook and gotten a wife instead, the best trade he'd ever made. Anna Blake had asked for a job and gotten a home, a husband, a child, and a purpose beyond mere survival. They'd saved each other in all the ways people could be saved, and in doing so, they'd built something that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of love and hard work and refusing to let tragedy define them. Ironheart Ranch stood strong for 50 more years under their leadership. They had 3 more children after James. The ranch became known throughout Wyoming as a model of success and integrity. And when they died elderly and content within months of each other, because neither could bear to be without the other for long, they were buried together on that hill overlooking the valley they'd loved. Their story became legend. The woman who rode into Wyoming with nothing but a carpetbag and courage. The man who'd buried his heart with his first family and learned to love again. The way they'd faced down violence and gossip and their own fears to build something beautiful. The Ironheart Ranch still stands today, run by their descendants. And on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right through the valley, some say you can still hear Anna singing while she works, and Garrett's quiet laughter in response. A love story written in Wyoming dirt and blood and hope. A redemption earned through courage and choosing life even when death seemed easier. The iron heart of a ranch that became a home. And the 2 broken people who made each other whole.